It's your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to have you guys back for final show of the week. Lots of good stuff coming up today, but in the interest of full disclosure, let me say I recorded this one a little bit further ahead of time than I normally did because of some obligations Thursday night and Friday, good ones, having to do with some birthdays in the family. So does not include any topical stuff on the Twins opener Thursday because I was recording this right around the time that was getting started. So if you're like, Rand, what did you forget the Twins had their their opener on Thursday against the Royals? I did not forget. Normally I would talk about that on a Friday podcast, but not in this case. And guess what? I will have 161 more to talk about the rest of this year. Good stuff coming up the rest of the show, though. Clarie De Lune, longtime Minneapolis musician, now based out in Los Angeles. She's also an NBA writer for The Guardian, will join me. She follows the Lakers very closely, helps me set up just the rest of the season, that big game between the Wolves and Lakers on Friday, and some good NBA talk with Claire. I'll play that in just a minute or two here. Going to start that one a little sooner than I would normally do because I enjoyed that conversation so much. But some playoff stuff towards the end of the show as well, just some updated look at where local teams stand. But if I have just one baseball thought, again, like I said, I don't have Twins-specific stuff right here, but I just want to say off the jump that I am more excited for this Major League Baseball season than I've been for a great long time, and it has 100% to do with the rules changes in the game. I feel like the pitch clock, the things that they're doing to speed up the game, but more importantly, take the dead space out of the game. That kind of stuff was driving me crazy over the years. It was harder and harder to go to a game. It was harder and harder to watch a game on TV. It was certainly harder to think about bringing family, kids to a game when it drags on, when you're probably not going to end in fewer than 3 hours. I'm way more likely this year to attend a game in person than I would have been just a year ago. So right off the jump, kudos to Major League Baseball for making those changes. And again, we'll see how much of an impact it has during the regular season, but it had a huge impact in the minor leagues last year, shaving 20, 25 minutes off of game times. It had a huge impact during spring training this year, doing the same to spring training games. I think it'll have a similar impact in the regular season. I think as long as the players continue to abide by it, adjust to the rules, I think everything will be just fine. So looking forward to this baseball season more than I have been. What a great time to be a sports fan with everything going on, and just really looking forward to everything baseball has to offer this year, because that's my first love. That is the sport I grew up playing. That's the sport I grew up watching. I think you guys know, longtime Atlanta Braves fan growing up, videotaped all of the games of terrible Braves teams just because that was how much I loved baseball back in the day. My interest in baseball, like I said, has waned over the years. It is trying to win me back this season, and I will give it my fullest attention and see how much of a difference this makes, and I think it will make a significant difference because I can feel it already in my enthusiasm for this season.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
All right, I'm really happy to have musician and NBA writer for The Guardian, Clarie De Lune, on with me today. She's been on once before. Daily Delivery historians might know. No, she was on a couple years ago, at one of the earlier parts of the podcast. But I always appreciate Claire's perspectives on the NBA and particularly on the Lakers. So when I had this Wolves-Lakers game Friday circled on my calendar, I thought, who better to have on right now than Claire out in California right now. Claire, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is like quite the middle of the intersection of my wheelhouse between Wolves and Lakers.
It is.
My two hometown teams.
Right, because are you from Minnesota originally?
I'm originally from New York, but okay. I lived in Minnesota for like a decade in Minneapolis. So I got into the NBA during that time while I was living in Minnesota. So the Timberwolves are sort of like my first intro into like going to games and, like following a team. And it was during like around the Jimmy Butler time. So an exciting and tumultuous time for the Wolves for sure. But yeah, so and I love Minnesota. So it still feels like home in a lot of ways. My mom lives there still. So yeah.
Let's talk about the Lakers. Now I think I saw a clip of it was Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett kind of talking. I don't know if I think it was a podcast. I think it was KG's podcast. I saw a social clip, them talking about trying to talk through like the most disappointing teams in the NBA this year. And they were trying to be nice, but I think KG finally settled on Lakers. And I wouldn't disagree.
How? Really?
How not? Yes.
You find them disappointing?
The Lakers? Massively disappointing, don't you?
I feel like their expectations were in hell. I mean, they entered the season with Russell Westbrook's contract. He's still on the roster. I mean, I think there was a lot of hopes that they were going to make big changes in the offseason. But once they didn't move Russ, I feel like their ceiling without a big trade was the play-in tournament. Like it was not that construction of that roster was never going to be successful. I think that was abundantly apparent. I was like, I mean, I've always hated that move. I hated that signing and that trade. When it happened, I would say like 2 months into the trade happening or like into the season, I was already just like, have him come off the bench. Other Lakers, I would go on Laker podcasts and be like, they should have him come off the bench. They're like, you're crazy. That would never happen. Russell Westbrook, first ballot MVP, first ballot Hall of Fame MVP. He would never come off the bench. I was like, immediately, like I watched this happen and I was just like, this is a disaster of enormous proportions. There is no way out of the situation besides to either bench him, send him home, or trade him. And that's how I felt literally 2 months into this experiment. And now we were on year 2. So when the Lakers didn't trade him in the offseason, I was like, they're like, there's nothing good is going to come of this roster. He ate up $47 million worth of salary, which meant that not only did you have to deal with Russell Westbrook and his poor production, but you had no money to pay anyone else. So it was like LeBron, AD, both of whom have battled injuries, as you know, the last few years.
Right.
Russell Westbrook, who was coming off the worst offensive season by a player in NBA history. And then a bunch of minimum guys and people on vet minimums, rookies, people who are signed from the G League, etc. It's like that does not a championship roster make. Like they're not contenders. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say it was painful. Their season was painful to watch until the trade deadline, but was it disappointing? Like my expectations were super low for this team.
Well, do we overvalue year 20 LeBron then? Because I feel like for a long time it was anytime you got LeBron, you've got a chance. And maybe he's, still a very good player, but maybe not the guy who can just automatically carry you to 45, 50 wins anymore then.
I mean, I think the story with LeBron and with Anthony Davis to some degree is he is still that guy for stretches of time. The problem is you want those stretches of time to be able to be timed out to occur when it matters, like leading into the playoffs, in the playoffs. You don't want LeBron to have to turn it on and be a 40-point-a-night guy in January to make sure that you don't fall out of the race for the play-in and fall 15 games below 500. And the problem with the Lakers were that the way that the roster was constructed before the Westbrook trade, they needed the absolute best version of either AD, LeBron, or both any given night just to sneak out a single-digit win. And that is a recipe for disaster because even though LeBron is Iron Man in a lot of ways, he is, pushing 40 and bodies just can't really handle that level of a workload for 82 game seasons. And I think personally, like, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that it was mismanagement of LeBron and Anthony Davis's health and bodies to not put the proper supporting cast around them, because I think the injuries were inevitable to them with the workload that they were carrying and the fact that they were basically single-handedly carrying the Lakers offense. And so I do think LeBron is still, his ceiling, I think, is still among the highest ceilings of any player in the league. I would put him on a good night. I would put him like top 5 still, but he can't sustain that for 82 games, nor should he be expected to on a team that's properly managed and run.
I think that's fair. And then obviously they make a huge, shakeup at the deadline and suddenly become Wolves West. Just start, they had Pat Bev at the start of the year, but then he's gone. But then they reacquire D'Angelo Russell. We had a semantic debate about whether he's a former Wolf or former Laker before we started recording. But he's both.
Schrodinger's D'Angelo Russell.
What's that?
I said Schrodinger's D'Angelo Russell. He is both a former Wolf and a former Laker.
Yes, he is. And then, of course, Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt. And, following a smattering of Lakers Twitter, seems like Lakers fans are pretty happy with what happened since the deadline of ostensibly getting rid of Russ, but also what these guys have brought. What have you seen since then? It seems like they've been playing better, even when LeBron was hurt, and now he's back, obviously, and playing in this game Friday. It seems like the depth is better now, at least.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I do think that Rob Pelinka basically worked a miracle as far as how bad Russell Westbrook's contract is, how bad he was playing, and what he was able to get back from him, that contract, by only moving one first-round pick. I think the expectation pretty much all year long was that they were going to have to move both first-round picks to get rid of the contract. And even then that they might not get back something that was like a needle mover. I'm not saying that D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, and Jared Vanderbilt are like ultimately super needle movers. Like, does this make this a championship team? Like, probably not. But I do think they got a lot better. They didn't have to give up a ton. D'Lo's contract is also expiring. I mean, because the only, valuable thing really about Russ's contract at this point was that it was expiring. Meanwhile, he got bought out anyway, and the Clippers ended up signing him for the minimum, which I think falls out of the narrative when people talk about, oh, look how good he's been on the Clippers. Like, people poo-pooed him on the Lakers, and it's like, yeah, well, he costs like less than a fourth of what he was costing for the Lakers, and it's a lot easier to stomach like a million turnovers a game when you're paying him very very little. But that being said, like, I do think that it was a great haul for the Lakers, considering just how no one wanted that contract, and he literally, the only people who did and ultimately end up taking the contract were the Utah Jazz, who are probably going to be heading towards a tank at this point. There seem to be falling out of the plan. Yes. I mean, it could change, but I think Vanderbilt was, to me, the star of the trade. I think that was a great pickup for the Lakers. I think I have a lot of qualms with Darvin Ham's coaching. I think he's been quite underutilized thus far, but I do think he's an awesome player and a great defender. They needed size, they needed defense, so that was great for them. Malik Beasley ostensibly should have been a great piece at his best, because he is just essentially like a guy you put out there to shoot jumpers, and they didn't really have anyone like that. He hasn't been great of late, but he has the potential, and like they just didn't have any shooters on the roster. And then D'Lo, I mean, like, as much as I know Timberwolves fans have had a up and down relationship with him, like, he is a just objective upgrade over Russell Westbrook in pretty much every way. He's a better shooter. He's a better facilitator. He's younger. I mean, just like you name it. Still cheaper, even though like probably not as cheap as you would hope. So yeah, I think overall it was kind of amazing that they got all of that and got rid of Russ for only a first round pick. And I think that was really impressive. And I was the first person to criticize Rob Pelinka, but I think he did a good job there.
Yeah, and D'Lo, I mean, Lakers people aren't trying to talk themselves into a let's extend D'Lo conversation, are they? Because that doesn't feel like that's the right idea.
I think I'm not opposed to extending D'Lo. I think it would have to be at a rate that's obviously a lot lower than his current salary. And I think from what I hear in Lakers circles, like, that's sort of what they're looking at, is the keeping D'Lo, giving him a new contract, but at a more proportionate rate to his output. I think the contract he is on right now was like a ceiling contract, and I think we've kind of seen what his ceiling is, and it's not what he's getting paid. So assuming that D'Lo would be on board for that, I think that the Lakers are. My thing is, like, from interviews and stuff I've heard with D'Lo, like, I think he's still hoping to get a lot more money than the Lakers are probably going to be willing to offer him. So he's been really reluctant in interviews to, like, someone asked him, like, oh, do the Lakers feel like home? Do you feel like you're home? And he's like, well, like, I haven't been here very long, and I'll wait and see and find out how it goes before I call it home. Like, you're not going to like trick me into like saying I'm just going to take a pay cut for the culture. But I think it depends. It depends on his output in the playoffs. It depends on a lot of things. He hasn't really stayed healthy since he's gotten back to LA. So he hasn't given them a whole lot of reason to pay him. But I mean, I'm definitely team re-sign D'Lo over team go find Kyrie Irving, like 100 times out of 100.
Yeah. And, what's interesting, and I'll get to like the Friday game in particular in a minute and a little bit of Wolves stuff, but like just the nature of the West means that anything is kind of still possible, right? Like for both of these teams. I would put the Timberwolves in the firm disappointing category too, in terms of like definitely. From what people thought at the start of the year, even with the Towns injury, like, this felt like it was a better team than was going to transpire. And I think they're playing much better now. Maybe we're starting to kind of see what the vision is, because as good as maybe D'Lo is talent-wise and as good as he's been for the Lakers, I think Conley's just a better fit for what they need, especially when Towns, I love that trade for them as well. Especially when Towns and Edwards are healthy. But so I think both these teams, coming in around 500, still question of play-in, playoffs, or completely out at this point if you hit a skid at the end of the year. But just that said, like the opportunity you have in the West right now, just with how jumbled it is, and I don't think there's an elite team in the West. Like I think the Suns are probably the favorite right now, even though they're the 4th seed just after getting KD. I think Denver's good, but Denver's never been able to get it done when it really matters most. So just the opportunity is there, and just how much each of these games matter. It's been fun.
I mean, this is for sure the most parity I've ever seen in either conference, really, since I've been watching. It's absolutely insane. The 6 seed and the 13 seed are separated by like 2.5 games, I think.
Yeah.
It's nuts. And then you really have like the Nuggets are, far and away have the best record in the West. And then you have the Grizzlies and the Kings kind of like jockeying for second place, that's crazy to say even in and of itself. Yeah. I just had a piece come out today in The Guardian about the Kings and about like, how did they do that? But the rest of the West, really from the 4 seed down, almost all the way to the bottom, I would exclude maybe like the Rockets and probably the Blazers at this point from that.
Yeah, and Spurs,
And the Spurs, correct. Those 3 I think are excluded from the conversation, but really everyone from 4 through whatever that is, 12, besides that, it's like anybody. Any combination of those could end up anywhere, which is absolutely wild. I'm someone who feels like I want to give the Warriors the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. I understand that they've been atrocious on the road this year. They've had some serious personnel issues, like obviously starting from the Draymond Jordan Poole punch all the way to like Andrew Wiggins dealing with family stuff or whatever he's dealing with for weeks on end. And so they're it's not smooth sailing for the Warriors, but they are the defending champs. They do have most of the same like important key members, and there is regular season fatigue. Like if anyone can turn it on in the postseason, it's probably these guys. And after so many years of having such immense postseason success, I can understand why it would be hard to like get it up for a road game in Houston on a Wednesday in February. So I get that. But yeah, besides them and the Suns, I mean, I'll put it this way. I don't really think a Western Conference team is going to win the championship this year.
No, I think the 3 best teams are in the East.
The 3 best teams in the league are all in the Eastern Conference. So I would be shocked if a Western team wins it all. But as far as who can come out of the West, if you told me it was one of probably like, I would say probably 5 or 6 teams, I'd be like, yeah, I could see it.
Do you consider the Lakers part of that? You said probably not before, but I mean, they kind of feel like they're in that, no, maybe not quite, but kind of in that Warriors territory where it was just a few years ago they won the pandemic championship, they won in the bubble. Like they still got LeBron. Like anytime you get LeBron, it feels like you still have a chance.
I definitely think that they have just as good of a chance as any of the other like comparable teams in the West.
Yes.
Like I would be no less or more shocked to hear that the Grizzlies were in the finals as I would the Lakers at this point, because none of them are very strong and they all have huge flaws and also huge strengths. It's really hard for me to believe in both the health of LeBron and AD at the same time right now.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that they would need to like truly be contenders, is for them both to be healthy and firing on all cylinders at the same time. They haven't had that really since the bubble year,
Yeah.
where they were both had a full playoffs run healthy. So that would be my biggest concern. As far as like the supporting cast and the quality of the two best players, yeah, I'd put them up with pretty much anyone in the West. I mean, like their supporting cast is pretty deep now. It's pretty good. And LeBron and AD are still amazing. So I wouldn't count them out. Like I don't think they're like a laughing stock by any means. And I think if they get into the play-in, they'll probably get into the playoffs because I do like my chances with LeBron and AD in a single elimination game against pretty much anybody. But as far as like in a 7-game series, that's where more of like the war of attrition stuff starts coming into play.
Yeah.
And I'm just not
no
sure
doubt.
based on what the load they had to carry, my whole point earlier, the
Yep.
whole year and the miles on their bodies from this year. I just don't the health is the big thing for me, but health is going to be a big thing for a lot of these teams.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think.
I mean, the Wolves even finally just getting relatively healthy. I mean, Towns missed 52 games this year. I don't think anybody would have imagined that
No,
when
yeah.
we got word of the injury initially. And Edwards looked like he was going to be out a month, and he was out like 3 games because he
Yeah.
will not rest. But this game Friday, I mean, I think I was looking at a few days ago at the 538 NBA website, and they do like importance grades on all of the games were left, and they like this had like an important score of 100 out of 100
For
because
both teams.
I think the game just gets that grade because it factors
Yeah.
in like the implications for both teams. And like,
Yeah.
and the Wolves already have the season series one, so the tiebreaker is not at stake here, but just wins a lot. Like any small movement in the standings right now just feels like you can go from 7th to 10th, 10th to 6th. Like you win a couple games and you are all of a sudden it just completely changes. So Friday feels massive to me.
It is. It's a massive game. The funny thing is about the second, basically all the remaining games on the schedule for all these teams is any game is important for anyone between like 5 and 12 in the West. And then you compound that with if that game is against somebody else and who's also in that race,
Right.
it doubles in importance. It becomes exponentially more important because not only are you affecting your standings by your win-loss totals, but you might be handing someone a win who's already above you or just below you in the standings. So it kind of compounds itself in that way. And because it's such a wide swath of teams that are so close, the likelihood is high that it will be that second scenario if you're a Western Conference team. So I feel like the only people who are really sitting pretty right now are Denver. And I mean, maybe those those 3 Eastern Conference teams you mentioned who are going to end up 1, 2, 3 and what pick your order. Besides that, I think pretty much the whole NBA is like playing like their lives depend on it right now, unless they're tanking.
And do you feel like I feel like that's kind of a function of the play-in. Like, and I think people groused about it a few years ago. I kind of liked it from the beginning, and I think you're seeing it. I think you're seeing it now. Like, if you've got a chance to get 10th, or at least there's enough teams that have that reasonable chance to get into the play-in, even if that doesn't sound appealing, like once you kind of think about it a little bit more, like, yeah, okay, why would we want to tank? Like, there's a clear difference between the teams that are really bad now and the teams that are at least trying to be 1 through 10. And then there's still the elite teams, but there's way fewer terrible teams now.
For sure. And I think here's the thing about the play-in, and I love the play-in. There's exactly 2 teams, or I guess 4 teams total, who this does not benefit. And those are the teams who end up at the end of the season when the standings stop in 7 and 8 in each conference. Because those are teams who would have gone just directly to the playoffs and now have to play as basically single elimination games for their lives. Everyone else benefits.
Yeah.
The whole rest of the league, the NBA itself, the TV partners, the fans, everyone else benefits from this because it's way more entertaining. It makes a way better product. It's going to make more money. Like, this is better for everyone. It offers more opportunities. I think it also something that is sort of like an understated part of it is that it accounts or sort of like helps even the balance from like when you do have somebody like Towns or something who has to miss months in the regular season and it docks where you're going to end up in the standings. I think it kind of benefits those teams. And because we're seeing so many more of these key injuries to key players, I think it kind of helps account for that. It's like, okay, well, if you have to go on a losing streak for a month in the middle of the regular season, you can have a single elimination game and end up in the playoffs anyway, So Yeah, I think it's great. And I can understand the frustrations if you're a 7 or an 8 seed. But besides that, like, I think it's really just a good thing that benefits everybody.
A couple more thoughts. Is this, I mean, it kind of feels to me, and I think the Wolves still have a decent chance at top 6, especially if they win Friday. But this feels to me like Friday could be, we could see a rematch of this in 7-8 or at some iteration of this. Like this, these could be two teams that play again pretty soon.
Absolutely. I could 100% see, yeah, either them playing, ending up playing each other in the playoffs or for sure in the play-in. I think that like both of these teams are very much in danger of ending up in the play-in tournament. I would say even maybe likely because I trust the Warriors to hang on to that 6 seed. I just think that now when it matters most, they're going to turn it on. Steph is going to like use every ounce of gas he has in the tank to avoid that play-in scenario. So,
well, and everyone wants the Kings too. Let's be honest. Like as great a story as they are, like getting the Kings if they're the 3 is a nice start at 3-6.
Oh, I think everyone definitely wants them. My only thing I would caution against is like there's been so many times that we've learned the lesson of like trying to aim for a certain team is a recipe for disaster. And I think the only tried and true thing to do is just to assume you're going to have to go through everyone, not really care like what order that happens in, and just go for it. My only exception to that rule would be if I was a team in the West, I would want to play the Suns as early as possible because Kevin Durant is still getting back into a rhythm. And by the later rounds of the playoffs, he's going to be like, they're going to be unstoppable. They're going to have developed some chemistry. But right at the very, very, very beginning, he's still coming off an ankle injury. He's still getting back to himself. They haven't had any time to get any reps together. So that would be my only like strategy thing is I'd be like, if I'm going to have to play the Suns, which I am because they have Kevin Durant, I want to play them as early as possible because I want to get it out of the way before they've like developed any sort of team chemistry. Besides that, I don't think you should be like trying to get or dodging anybody because I think we've seen like it's so unpredictable.
Well, yeah, we've seen teams in the past like, we want to play them, and then all of a sudden it bites them, and you're right. You can't try to finesse a matchup, or if you do, it's going to end up, the team that you thought you didn't want is the team you wanted, and things like that. So it's just go play everybody, and see how it goes, and that's what makes it fun. And everything's going to change again a few more times in the next 5 or 6 games. That's what's been so fun. Like it's been like this for like 25 games. I feel like maybe even longer. Like every game matters so much.
I know. And usually by this point in the season, it's very obvious, especially before the play-in, it's very obvious who's going to make it. Usually there's like a huge gap between the teams that have given up around the All-Star break and the teams that still think they have a chance. And so it's like, maybe it's a question of who's going to be that 8 seed and who's going to like fall off and end up in 9th. But for the most part, seeds number 1 through like 6 or 7 are usually pretty set by this time. So it's awesome that like, the only things we know for sure right now in, end of March, early April are that the Nuggets are going to be the 1 seed.
Yes.
Pretty much everything else is a question mark at this point.
Which is awesome. Claire, final thing for you. Anything you're working on, writing, music, anything that you want to tell us about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just had a piece about aforementioned Sacramento Kings is out now on The Guardian. I'm going to be writing a lot more from them as the playoffs ramp up. And I have a new album with Tiny Deaths, my alter ego, right? That I am just finishing now. It's going into mixing and mastering this week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll probably be a single sometime late spring and record in the fall.
Awesome. Very exciting times for you. Appreciate you taking some time today to catch up on all things NBA. We will both be watching, I'm sure, Friday night as things unfold and the rest of the year. But always appreciate chatting with you, Claire. Take care. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Clarie De Lune for joining me on the show today. She's just one of those people I follow on Twitter and who is just genuinely smart about basketball. I think I started following her like several years ago when I saw her perform. Like I said, she's also a musician. She mentioned she has a new single coming out with her band Tiny Deaths, her alter ego. And I saw Tiny Deaths. It was like maybe 6 or 7 years ago and was really impressed. Started following her on Twitter and came to understand she's a huge basketball fan because kept following her on Twitter. And she had, a lot of people think they're smart about the NBA, but she is truly smart about the NBA, has very reasoned, well thought out takes. So I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Hope you had enjoyed the perspective of the Lakers, where they're coming from this season, and that kind of thing. So, again, glad to have her on. Again, it's been a couple years since we had a chance to chat, but really good to get that perspective, especially heading into that big game Friday, which brings me to the cooler, kind of an extended cooler today, but I wrote on Thursday about kind of all 6 of the major pro sports teams in this market and kind of where they stand in kind of the playoff push right now. We'll start with the Wolves because that is what we just talked about with Claire. Basketball Reference giving them a 75% chance to make the playoffs right now, including a 40% chance of flat out finishing in the top 6 in the conference. And that's as of Thursday afternoon. Like Claire and I talked about, everything is subject to change. That could be slightly tweaked by the time you're listening to this Friday because teams play, things get shifted around, things like that. But it's going to fluctuate as the year goes on, I'm sure, throughout these final 5 Wolves games. But right now, in so much better shape than they were even at the start of this West Coast road trip, where you thought 1 win was possible, 0 wins was possible, 2-1, you would have taken that in a heartbeat, and that's what they got with those back-to-back wins over the Warriors and the Kings. So Wolves in pretty good postseason position right now. I mean, I don't know what that gets them in the first round, but if they can get up to that 6 seed, get a matchup against the Kings, who they've been quite good against this season, I wouldn't put it past them to at the very least be competitive in a first-round series and maybe even be able to advance to round 2. Now the Wild, by virtue of gaining at least 1 point in 20 of their last 21 games. You realize that 20 of their last 21 games, 16, 1, and 4. They're now in first place in the Central, best chance of winning the Central per Hockey Reference. Given just the 6th best chance right now, though, 4.1%, this is Hockey Reference, among Western Conference teams of winning the Stanley Cup. And I think that's a function, if you look at what determines Stanley Cup odds, a lot of that has to do with goal differential, winning a lot of close games. We saw that with the Vikings this year too, right? Vikings were 13-4, but they'd won a lot of close games. People were not giving them the sort of kind of respect that maybe a lot of teams of their record had, and they got beaten in the first round. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to the Wild. What I am saying is, even though their playoff prospects look great right now, they're almost a cinch to make it into the postseason and have a good chance of being the division winner and very least being in the top 2 in the division and hosting at least a first-round series. Winning a cup, still a battle for them because I don't think they've shown, at least over the long haul of the entire season, that they're maybe as good as some of these other teams. But we'll see. I think they're a very good team. I think they've got a chance, and they've certainly improved their lot over the last couple of weeks and months here. Twins, baseball perspective, giving them a 67% chance of reaching the postseason going into the season. And get this, they have a 4.5% chance of winning the World Series. Better odds than the Wild. I would guarantee you there's not a single Minnesota sports fan who would consider that to be reality at this point, but that is what the numbers say at the very least. Vikings, there was an over-unders came out per DraftKings the other day. 8.5 is their win total over-under right now. Again, a lot of free agency to play out. They got the draft, obviously, still next wave of free agency. We'll see if that number changes before the year starts, but kind of the expectation that in a 17-game schedule, they're going to slide back into that kind of squishy, soft, middle, maybe barely over 500, things like that, at least according to the betting odds. So interesting to watch that one as time goes on. Lynx and Loons, pretty similar championship odds released last month. Lynx 35-1, Loons 32-1. Lynx, though, still have the number 2 pick in the draft coming up April 10th, and the Loons have won they've gotten a win or a draw in their first 4 games in MLS this season. So maybe, just maybe, there is hope for those 2 teams as well. Loons, by the way, have made the postseason in each of the last 4 years. Can Adrian Heath make it 5 in a row? We will see. That'll do it for me today. Like I said, plenty of good stuff coming up next week. Patrick Royce, and I'm sure he and I will talk about plenty of Twin stuff on Monday off of this first series against the Royals. Home opener coming up a week from Thursday against the Astros. Royce a lot more pessimistic than Lavelle E. Neal and even Chip was, so I'll love to get his take on this first series against Kansas City and what is coming up next. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy the weekend. Back at it again on Monday.